a world leader, particularly in glaucoma. Our glaucoma service is world-renowned, known to be the top glaucoma service in the world. And we have two of its leaders here today, Dr. Jay Katz and Dr. John Myers, to share with you just a little bit of the cutting-edge work that they are doing and to share some of the exciting new innovations that have really transformed glaucoma from a sentence to blindness to a disease that people are flourishing with and living very full lives with. So before we begin, and please finish your dessert, but I wanted to outline what our program is going to be. There will be 2 talks, and then each talk will be followed by an opportunity for asking some questions. So please think of any questions that you might have, and you'll have a chance to ask them at the end of each talk. And our speakers will be happy to respond then. And we'll start off then with Dr. Katz. Where are you, Jay? Dr. Jay Katz. Dr. Katz is director of our glaucoma service. Dr. Katz graduated from Yale in medical school, did his residency there, and then came to Wills as a glaucoma fellow. And the rest is really history. He stayed on to join Dr. Spaeth and to become one of the world's leaders in clinical care and research and education. He's recently taken on an exciting new job as Chief Medical Officer of Glaukos, a new company in the glaucoma world, and he's a top go-to guy worldwide. It's really a great pleasure to introduce him, and I can't wait to find out all about what he's doing too. Jay.
Thank you, Julia. And welcome, everyone. I'm glad you made it. And I know a lot of you. It's nice to see you without having to shine a bright light in your eyes. So hopefully we can talk about a few things that might be of interest for you this afternoon. The topic I picked is hopefully going to inspire all of us to attain a higher goal for treating glaucoma and other eye diseases. And that's, can we make the disease reversible? And a lot of you have heard that. We tell you that we're trying to stabilize your disease, but that really isn't enough for many. We really need to make it better. Just quickly, what is glaucoma? Glaucoma, there are many different types, and I know it's all confusing when you think about all the different types, but they share a common theme in that they all end up damaging the vision by damaging the optic nerve, the nerve that goes from the eye to the brain. So even amongst the glaucoma community, we often have to think of what's the best way to really capture all the different diseases under the heading of glaucoma. And primary open-end glaucoma is the most common type that we have in the United States. And that's where you really have a very characteristic pattern of damage to the optic nerve, where you lose that kind of pink color, which I think you can see here in the healthy nerve, and you get more of a whiteness because there's loss of the nerve tissue until you get over here where we lost virtually all the nerve tissue. And you get characteristic changes in the peripheral vision. You lose the vision off on the side typically first, so it's a very gradual, insidious disease, and unfortunately often gets diagnosed at a late stage because it's so kind of slow and kind of happening more in one eye than the other, and so we're often diagnosing it late, unfortunately, unless people have an eye exam routinely. It's interesting to look at the optic nerve that carries all the information from the brain, and it's comprised of what we call retinal ganglion cells. Those are the nerve cells that line the inner part of the eye, that capture all the signals of vision and take that back to the brain. The optic nerve is about 2 inches long, so each cell that forms the part of the nerve, so they're about roughly 1 million to 1.5 million nerve cells, they each are about 2 inches long going back to the brain. And they actually connect in the middle part of the brain with another nerve cell, and then finally that connects to a third nerve cell making up the vision system in our brain. It's a pretty complex connection system, and that's part of the challenge of trying to rewire or repopulate the optic nerve if it gets damaged. So I just want to underscore for you the importance of the pressure in the eye. Whatever the pressure is that's damaging the eye, our only known effective treatment for glaucoma currently is lowering the pressure. We know that really does work. There are other issues like lack of blood flow, there are genetic factors, a lack of certain substances, maybe an overabundance of other bad substances that also have a role in the development and the progression of glaucoma. But that's where the exciting part is, that we're trying to modify those other areas currently with research, trying to figure out how there may be other ways of helping other than pressure reduction. So our conventional therapy, we're not going to talk really about medical therapy, but that's where we usually start. And then we have surgical therapy, and you'll hear about that from Dr. Myers. But all those are geared towards lowering eye pressure because we know that's effective. But in the future, we're going to have other therapies that we're pretty confident that will supplement the use of conventional therapy that we use currently. I just want to give you a quick lowdown on glaucoma and show you what a problem it is. So nobody can be necessarily spared from this disease. Famous people like Ray Charles, Stevie Wonder, George Bush, one of our ex-presidents, they've all been afflicted with glaucoma. There are up to 70 million people worldwide with glaucoma, 6 million being blind. It's the number one cause of irreversible blindness in the world. Number 3 in the United States, but among African Americans and Latinos in the United States, it's the number one cause of irreversible blindness. And we all know what a tragedy it is for individuals and families that have glaucoma there, loss of vision. But for society, it's a cost of over $3 billion a year helping to care for patients that are blind from glaucoma. Over half the people in our country that have glaucoma have yet to be diagnosed because it's such a slow, insidious disease. And we have to do a better job at diagnosing them early. And also there's going to be a 50% increase over the next 10 years because as we age, there's a higher chance of developing glaucoma, and our population is aging. So that's another huge population that we have to kind of care for and diagnose quickly. I mentioned to you that lowering intraocular pressure makes a difference. You've spent hundreds of millions of dollars of your tax money with these studies that are listed here, funded by the National Institute of Health predominantly, showing that lowering pressure in different groups of glaucoma patients, that lowering the pressure really does stop the disease from progressing. And up until now, that's what we've looked at, stopping the disease from progressing. That's been the target. And I'm going to kind of change that for you a little bit later. But in this busy graph here, I just have 2 points I want to make for you. This is a study looking at lowering pressure in patients with glaucoma. And they looked at the degree of pressure control. If you kept their pressure always below 18 and their average pressure was about 12, the visual field checking for progression and progression of the disease, as a group, they were pretty darn stable. And if you look at the average pressures for the different groups, meaning the higher the pressures go, the more likely it is that the disease will progress. So pretty clear cut that pressure is a very important factor in glaucoma progression. So why do people go blind from glaucoma, you may ask, if you know that pressure reduction makes a difference? Well, again, 1 out of 3 don't get diagnosed until they're already legally blind because it's so insidious. 1 out of 3 are probably inadequately treated. And part of that is our reluctance to be really aggressive in lowering pressure probably to where it should be, or we need something else. That's something else we'll talk about in just a moment. And unfortunately, 1 out of 3 patients are not really keeping to their medical regimen or following up for a variety of reasons. So here's the model that we use in showing what happens with glaucoma. We know that as we get older, we have a little bit of loss of our nerve cells over time. But that really doesn't impact on most of us, even when we're 80 or 90 or even older, if we're not suffering from glaucoma. But with glaucoma, there's an acceleration of loss of the nerve cells in the eye, the optic nerve. And by treating patients, we can spare them the agony of going blind by leveling it off. And that's been our goal, just leveling it off, not trying to make it better necessarily, but leveling it off. And maybe that's just not enough. As I mentioned, a lot of people are already significantly impacted with their vision. Leveling them off is not really enough. So the question for us today is, can we improve things? And I'll go through a few areas for you today. Looking at pressure reduction, maybe that can actually reverse the disease a little bit. But maybe improving the blood flow might help. Maybe there are going to be substances we can use to perk up nerve cells that are ill, that aren't working particularly well. And we may even use stem cells, repopulating the optic nerve or resuscitating the optic nerve if it's not doing particularly well by using stem cell therapy. Now, there are examples clinically of instances where you have a disease where you can have reversibility. You know, people that have heart attacks, strokes, spinal cord injuries. And strokes and spinal cord injuries are really very much closely akin to glaucoma because it's involving a nerve cell in all three instances. And there are definitely areas that are ill that you can bring back to life. Yes, the nerve cells that are gone in these situations you can't bring back, but there are definitely areas of injury that are not fully dead, and you can bring them back to life by various forms of therapy. And some of them are actually listed here for this spinal cord injury, and interesting enough, some of them overlap with a few things I'm going to talk about with you with glaucoma today. You heard from Dr. Haller that Dr. Spaeth was the creator of our department here at Wills, and he's just been a very creative thinker over the years. Great ideas, thinking outside the box. And back in 1989, and I just had come as a fellow here to Wills, he was already talking back then about reversing the disease. And maybe that would change our whole concept of what we should be offering our patients. And that was back in 1989. And that was really the springboard for me to doing research as a clinical fellow. And you can see me here in my younger days already working on my calculations as a fellow here at Wills, trying to figure out if really what George was saying would be possible. And it turns out that when we looked at our patients very carefully in an unbiased way, that a lot of the patients did have some improvement looking at the nerve and in looking at the visual fields, something that really wasn't looked at carefully in the past. And this correlated very clearly with how much pressure reduction. So if you really lower the pressure a lot, you are really relieving a lot of stress and maybe allowing some of the nerve cells to recover that we were seeing in that study. Now I'm going to show you a slew of people that trained here at Wills. Mark Lesk was a fellow that followed me, and he used, instead of looking at photographs, which is what I was looking at, he was looking at complex machinery for scanning the back of the eye when we just started using this incredible technology, and really showed essentially the same thing, that you could see reversal of nerve damage by looking at scanning technology. And again, correlated that with how much pressure reduction there was. Most recently, Michael Weissberg was here as a clinical fellow from Israel, and he looked at, yet again, the most recent technology that we use for looking at the optic nerve, and also the most recent software for looking at visual fields. And again, the concept of reversibility was confirmed in that very careful study done by Michael. So you had several generations of fellows here kind of really confirming what we all thought. Dr. Joe Caprioli was a fellow here around the same time I was, and Joe is now the head of glaucoma at UCLA, and recently he published a great paper looking at data, again, very convincing, showing long-term visual and field improvement in patients that had a marked pressure reduction, in this case, virtually all of them with surgery. Let me just go on to blood flow. So that's the whole, it's reassuring that maybe pressure reduction, if we do it right, can have not only a good stabilizing effect, but maybe an improvement in some patients as well. But how can we do even better? Well, blood flow is very important for the health of the nerve, as for the rest of the body. You can see it's very richly supplied with blood vessels here. And there are some very convincing studies that if the blood pressure, if you're just looking at systemic blood pressure, if it dips below 50, that lower number, the chance of developing glaucoma or progressing from glaucoma just rises significantly. So there has to be some key way we can help patients with glaucoma with helping the circulation to the nerve. This is Jack Tribble, who is a resident here back in the 90s, and he did a neat study where he looked at blood flow in the glaucoma side, which you see here. This is the systole and diastole. With each heartbeat, the blood flow changes, just like you'd see almost like in an EKG. And here's the same eye after surgery to lower the eye pressure. And you can see that the amount of flow here being shown by this technique of looking at blood flow in the back of the eye and to the nerve in particular really does improve with a marked pressure reduction following glaucoma surgery. Dr. Surgott, who's head of our neuro-ophthalmology department here, has for years been very interested in the whole idea of ocular circulation, and we've partnered with him over the years in various studies, including this one where we looked at two common drugs for treating glaucoma, timolol and betaxolol. They're in the same kind of family, although they're somewhat different. And what we saw in this study was that timolol lowered pressure more than betaxolol, but interestingly, timolol had no effect on the circulation to the nerve, whereas betaxolol actually improved the circulation to the nerve. So there's a kind of a real search for drugs that may pharmacologically improve the circulation to the optic nerve in glaucoma that might be beneficial for the long run. When you're looking at cells in the body, and specifically now looking at the neurons, the retinal ganglion cells of the optic nerve, there are signals that will determine whether a cell dies or not. So it's like the yin-yang of life. There are some signals that say you should die, and other signals say no, you should continue to live. There are nutrient kind of signaling molecules. And one of them I'm going to talk about with you is the neurotrophins here in just a moment. So again, can we tip the scales with neurotrophins promoting cell survival? And there are many neurotrophins that have been identified, and they may have some role here for us in helping our glaucoma patients. So this was a study I'm showing you here in these graphs that compared timolol and bromonidine. They're both drugs that are used to lower eye pressure in glaucoma. They're commonly used. And background research-wise, in a research setting in the laboratory, we know that bromonidine can upregulate, cause cells to pump out more neurotrophins. That's been documented, and timolol does not do that. So with that basic science knowledge, if you look at the results of this study comparing timolol versus bromonidine, the pressure reduction was the same. There was probably a 2-3 millimeter reduction in pressure, which was identical in the two groups. But when you looked at the rate of progression of glaucoma, it was 40% with timolol alone over 4 years, and 10% with bromonidine. And that may have something to do with the upregulation of neurotrophic factors, these neurotrophins, and not just the pressure reduction is important, but maybe it has a twofold purpose, at least in this particular population. And that really deserves a lot more attention. We were one of the sites in this study, and I know there's a lot of interest here and elsewhere in looking at this further. Now, there's some clever people that thought, well, wait a second, maybe we can take some stem cells and really genetically program them to make neurotrophins at very high levels, like little cellular factories. Let's put them in a cage, mini cage, and insert it inside the eye. And inside the eye, they will release these neurotrophic factors as they're kind of living in the cage there inside the eye. And there's already a pilot study that's done that in glaucoma patients that were getting worse despite conventional therapy. And interestingly enough, not only did they stabilize in this pilot series, they actually showed some improvement. So exciting, kind of revolutionary work. So stem cells can be used that way to support maybe getting cells that are already there but ill to survive. That's one use of stem cells. But what all of you have heard about is using stem cells to repopulate if you're missing nerve cells within the optic nerve. Now in animals, we have actually successfully implanted human stem cells into animal eyes like this mouse and showed very clearly that they can differentiate into a nerve cell or retinal ganglion cell. So we're already kind of setting the groundwork for doing something in humans in glaucoma for the future. Some people have really jumped the gun a little bit. I think they're already trying to put stem cells into the eye in various ways. So this was done in South Florida. It's a registered clinical trial, but we really don't know quite how to put stem cells in for glaucoma yet, I don't think. And even though they're doing this and they're getting some isolated anecdotal reports of improvement, you also can make the New York Times, as they did, where patients lost their vision from problems like retinal hemorrhaging after injections of stem cells. So I think this is an exciting area, but I think we're not quite on the sophisticated level yet of knowing where to go yet for glaucoma clinically. We're still working that out. We have to figure out what kind of stem cells we're going to use, where we place it, figure out how to get the stem cells to go off towards the brain in the right way and hook up the right way and get the connections working. And it's pretty complicated. And there's some clever ways of looking at this. For example, reducing the zinc level seems to really help this situation. So we are figuring it out, and so that we can do it more safely when clinical trials will start. The last thing I'm going to talk to you about is some exciting things that we're already doing here at Wills clinically. We have a program here where we're trying to help patients that are getting worse despite conventional therapy, and they're getting worse and we don't know what else to do. There's some interesting work that's been done predominantly in Europe using electrical stimulation. So you stimulate the eye with these very mild currents, and the thinking is that it may resuscitate nerve cells that are not particularly healthy or get nerve cells that are existing to reconnect in ways where you improve vision. And there's an electrode system set up here with this kind of special glasses, and here's the control panel here. You can see hair has grown back very nicely here. No, just kidding, that's not part of it. Otherwise I'd be using this already. And here's somebody at home. The hope is that this is a system that would be used at home, and there's been preliminary information showing that it looks really exciting with patients reporting improvement and having objective evidence of improvement with that technique. Some of you might know about virtual reality sets. Young folks know all about this for gaming, but it's also being used in the medical field now for diagnostic testing perhaps, but also for visual training. The thought here is that if you stimulate with light with these virtual reality units, that stimulation of light, again, will either get some rewiring of nerve cells in the brain or the eye, or both, or getting sick nerve cells to resuscitate a little bit, recover, and function more rapidly and provide better vision. They've used this kind of technology for example, stroke patients in the past with some improvement, as well. So in summary, I'm going to leave you with the thought that we have some pretty good evidence already, but we're kind of really touching the tip of the iceberg. We know that pressure reduction can cause some reversibility, especially if you lower the pressure a great deal. Maybe improving circulation, getting more neurotrophins to kind of bathe the optic nerve cells. Introducing stem cells perhaps in the future. But even now we're having programs where we're stimulating the eye and the brain by either electrical signaling or by light sources with virtual reality. These are really all terribly important areas of research. Now this is the end of my talk, but it's just the infancy of visual restoration research, and just like my grandson here, Josh, and I did get permission from his mother to show this picture, we're testing the waters right now, seeing where we're going to go in the future. And so thank you again for attending. I'm sorry, we have a few minutes for questions if anybody has some questions there. Yes, sir.
Not that I recommend this, but just out of curiosity.
I have a microphone, actually.
Just out of curiosity, would systemic hypertension increase the blood pressure or blood in the eye?
So the question is, if you have systemic hypertension, is that a good thing by getting more blood to the eye? Well, it's kind of a complex thing. Our story to patients is that we like an average blood pressure because we know that systemic hypertension does cause damage to the blood vessels in the body, including the eye, so we don't really want systemic hypertension. And we also don't want systemic hypotension because we're worried that that's not going to perfuse the eye. So we still like kind of average blood pressure, not high or low. But that's a good thought. You know, if there's some way just to improve the circulation locally, that would be our goal. Yes.
What's the thinking about having a cup of tea every day?
Yeah. Yeah, you know, we have a ringer here, so you know, there's a recent paper that was published by Ann Coleman, who's at UCLA, and she's done some neat work looking at questionnaires predominantly of I think several thousand nurses, and she's come out with interesting information. And just like you would suspect, she's come out with papers saying that if you eat your fruit and vegetables, especially collard greens, you have less of a chance of developing glaucoma and progression of glaucoma. And also now, recently, they found that tea, and it has to be caffeinated tea, but it has nothing to do with the caffeine because coffee doesn't seem to show anything. But regular tea seems to be protective. And, you know, black tea, yeah, or green tea, I guess, as well. But not herbal teas, for example, or decaffeinated teas have been correlated with maybe a better prognosis. And we think that maybe it has something to do with the antioxidant properties. There are things called free radicals that are the bad actors that cause cells to, you know, maybe die off, and this counteracts that. That's the theory, but we really don't know, and we need better studies. They're kind of retrospective studies, meaning that we just look at, you know, maybe those people who drink tea are just generally healthier and they just watch their bodies more. You know, but it kind of goes along with, you know, your mom told you, you know, you should eat well and even exercise. You know, people have shown it has also been is beneficial for glaucoma patients. Yes, sir.
Is there any? Is there any genetic DNA markers for glaucoma? And if there is there any studies that are being done for correcting that?
Yeah, so the question, are there any genetic mutations that people have identified in glaucoma? And not surprisingly, there have been quite a few already with the advances in genetics, looking at various mutations. Now, most of them that have been identified, specific mutations, have been predominantly in children early on because just easier to, there's such a kind of a family tendency there often, it's easier to identify. But also even in adults, like with the exfoliation glaucoma, which is one of the open-angle glaucomas, we're identifying mutations. We're looking at mutations, for example, in collaboration here with a number of scientists over the years. Here at Wills, we've looked at things like mitochondrial DNA, which is not nuclear DNA. There are different locations, but they all have potential bad genes there that lead to the development of glaucoma. And the question is, can we start doing some type of gene therapy? And that's going to be a great lead-in, you know, using different ways of inserting material, using viruses and other means to kind of take the bad actors out and get the good actors in. Yeah, that's a heavy area of potential research for the future. So yeah, we're making headway, but it's going to turn out that there are probably going to be hundreds, if not thousands, of mutations that lead to the same problem, meaning glaucoma. It's not going to be just one gene for everybody. Yes?
Well, first of all, thank you, Dr. Katz, for taking the time to educate us. I guess because there are limited fundings, you know, for this area of research in glaucoma, particularly compared to cancer. So I wonder whether there have been any significant effort in cultivating collaborations, you know, across all the institutions, particularly like yourself, you know, with another or academic institutions.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think Wills has been a champion of participating in in multi-centered clinical trials, which is really the only way you can answer a lot of the questions. And even looking at that simple question of lowering intraocular pressure, does that make a difference? And I told you we spent, many hundreds of millions of dollars. Those are all multi-centered trials. No one center really could have shown that unless they did it for, 30 years, and nobody's going to wait that long and fund something that long. So to answer something in a reasonable period of time and recruit patients in clinical trials, I think Wills has always been at the forefront of wanting to participate and on a national or even an international level in studies. But even locally, we've collaborated with people here. It's easy for us to collaborate with basic science at Jefferson, and even now we're working with a number of people on the basic science level at Jefferson. We partnered, for example, with Shea on studies as well, and Drexel. We have a computer software program that we've worked with Drexel pretty closely. Dr. Myers has been involved with in developing some neat software with them. So yeah, we're more than open to try to advance science, and many times you can't do it alone. We recognize that. So that's a good point. Yes, sir. I'm sorry, not wearing my glasses, so I can't even see people out there. You're just kind of a little fuzzy.
You need to get off the mic.
I do. Got my glasses right in my pocket where it should.
Yes, thank you. Do you have any additional comments about low-tension glaucoma with pressures under 10?
Yeah, I didn't label them for the, lack of time, but that study I showed you with bromonidine versus timolol, that was done in a purely normal, what we call, low tension, normal tension is the same thing. Most of us like normal tension now because it's not really low, it's just normal. And can you have glaucoma with a normal range pressure? And the answer is yes. But it's still glaucoma because we know that if lowering the pressure also seems to benefit patients with normal tension glaucoma. But I think your question is if you take somebody who, let's say they started at 16 and you got them down to 10 and they're still getting worse, is that possible? And the answer is that some of them, yeah, they certainly do. I think it's a minority of that population, but yeah, there are some people like that. And our thinking is there are two things. We can either get the pressure even lower, and it's tricky because you don't want to get down to 0 because then the eye doesn't really work. It can't really have good vision. But there are people that have pressures, let's say 7 or 8 consistently, that are stable that were not stable at 10. That does occur. But that really leads into what I was talking about. There has to be some other way of treating the disease, whether it's improving the circulation, getting an upregulation of certain substances or providing substances for the eye, stimulating the eye in a different way. There has to be another form of therapy, and that's what we're trying to figure out. And I really truly believe that might be helpful. It's like that cage with the cells genetically modified to release neurotrophic substance. Those are people with super low pressures that are just continuing to get worse. Some of them are normal tension, not all. And you put this device in with the neurotrophic substance being generated inside the eye, and lo and behold, not only do they stabilize, they seem to get better. Very exciting for me. I mean, that shows that there are going to be other avenues of treatment for somebody who has a low pressure and you need something else. You need a different boost.
How are we doing on time? A couple more?
Yeah, maybe quickly.
In the January issue of Gleams, you discussed measuring pressures at home. How can we get the devices that you mentioned in the article?
Yeah, I mean, you rely on us to tell you what the pressures are always, and sometimes it's very inconvenient. Also, it doesn't give us a total information. When we check a pressure for a split second in the office, is that reflective of what your pressure is the entire day? No, and we recognize that, but it's not practical to take all of you home with me and measure your pressure throughout the day. Josh might enjoy that. There are some really clever ways of measuring pressure at home that have now been released by the FDA in our country. ProView is one instrument. Some of the doctors may have used it on some of you here. For example, it's shooting a little plastic arrow that bounces off the eye. It doesn't hurt. It's very tiny. And you can kind of do that at home with the home version. Unfortunately, it's about $4,000 to buy the instrument, so it's not practical for most people. And some people, it does require some dexterity and aim, so it'll be hard for some patients just to physically use it. But that's a beginning. And there's also a contact lens that the Triggerfish, which it's a soft contact lens you put on, and it'll show you changes in pressure over the course of a day. So you know when the highest pressure is, what time of the day it is. It doesn't actually give you the exact pressure reading, just shows you the changes in pressure. I think over the next few years we'll have better ways of doing it. This is technology that's rapidly moving forward. And there are a number of companies that have devices that, let's say you have cataract surgery or glaucoma surgery, you might have implanted at the same time a chip where your pressure can be measured hundreds of times a day, and that information sent to your doctor's smartphone. That technology already exists, and not too distant future that'll be offered to patients. So there'll be ways of generating a tremendous amount of information about pressure over the course of a day that will revolutionize, I think, and really speed up the process of decision-making in the care of glaucoma patients, so we can act more quickly if we don't think you're doing well. So stay tuned. I think there are devices out there. They're not necessarily perfect for most patients yet for a variety of reasons, but over a period of time, I think it'll be more readily available.